terms of my view, I think it's pretty obvious that what not only we have been through, but that we're continuing to go through, is not a temporary state that we have to endure before we can return. There's no going back, in my opinion. And I think that presents all kinds of practical issues for organizations, even though we have been able, in the main, those of us office-based, have been, in the main, been able to work more effectively from home than perhaps we would have been able to do in prior years, prior decades, because of the advancement of technology. I think the long-term implications are so fundamental to how we work, the relationship between employees and their employer, the role of leadership, the opportunity that exists, but the risk also in terms of diversity and inclusion, and the need for us to keep hold of this important topic of well-being, which I'm pleased has become part of regular discourse, but we've really got to think carefully about how we hold our attention onto that topic. Well, I think there is a changed set of expectations from employees, that is. And I think there's also a changed level of recognition from employers in terms of the old ways of working, that tradition of commute to office, work all day and commute, that despite our rhetoric, still put a heavy degree of emphasis on presenteeism as being a marker of a contribution. And I think there is also an enhanced level of trust. I still think there was a lot of skepticism amongst managers and leaders that working remotely, working from home really equated to actual work. And I think the collective experience has changed that. I think it's raised the levels of trust between managers and team members. I think it's raised the level of trust between team members and managers, generally speaking. People, and certainly our colleagues at Fujitsu, are telling us they feel as though their manager knows them better. They feel as though their manager cares for them as an individual, not just as a member of the team with tasks ahead of them. And so I think that relationship dynamic has altered. But I think the expectations of employees are unalterably changed. And by that I mean, whilst most of our employees are telling us through our surveys, we've had around 13,000 responses to specific COVID-related surveys and future ways of working surveys, most are telling us they do not want, 94% are telling us they do not want to go back to the working patterns and the working practices pre-pandemic. Now, they're also not telling us they're very comfortable continuing as we are. Most of us have got fatigue now with the same four walls 7 days a week. So the expectation is that we will create a better balance between what was before and what it is that we've experienced over this past, 10 months, and looks likely to go on for a number of months more. So I think it's imperative that HR leaders and business leaders think carefully about not only a hybrid model, because that's an easy term to leap to and to adopt, but put some practical structure around how they create flexibility, if that doesn't sound like an oxymoron. So we need that practical structure to create flexibility and shape your version of what the future way of working really will be. At Fujitsu, our expectation is we will have our version of a hybrid model. Now, we already had quite a high degree of flexibility in terms of where colleagues did their work from. Certain roles we had categorized as impossible to be done from home, and we've proven that's not true. Certain roles continue to have to be done in the office or at customer site. They're interacting with customers. They may be our critical engineers keeping the network running. They may be working on critical secret national infrastructure and therefore cannot be done remotely. But in the main, I expect that we will have a much greater degree of flexibility, and it will become the norm to not be in the office, whereas previously it was the norm to be in the office. I think what that will lead to is we will be much more precise about, well, what's the purpose of our office? Previously, it was for the majority to go and work. I mean, it sounds a pretty obvious thing for us to say, but that meant that many people, including me on certain days, would be spending most of the day having traveled to an office in a room on our own, on calls such as this, looking at a video screen. It might have been a bit larger than the one I have at home, but on telephone calls or the modern day equivalent of, or doing emails or working on our laptop or desktop. And when we think about doing that now, it just seems absurd. So what I expect is that we will repurpose our offices so that it become a place to go to with deliberate intent, to collaborate, to connect, to do the sorts of things that aren't exclusively face-to-face requirements, but are enhanced by being face-to-face, by working with our partners, by working with our customers, by working with each other, but going there with specific intent and specific purpose, rather than going there as a matter of course, just for BAU, because Monday to Friday I work and that means I go into the office. So I think the purpose of office should change. That agility, that dexterousness of how work gets done has been essential. When you think now, as we're back into a situation in the UK where schools are closed and we are needing to be dexterous as individuals and as an organization as we balance the need to do our jobs, but also homeschool. And they sound like two full-time jobs to me. So that dexterity and that level of accommodation and understanding and collaboration of what can be done, when it can be done, and not needing for it to be done in traditional hours or all of you simultaneously on a call. That I think is one of the valuable experiences of the pandemic that we can hold on to. Hopefully it won't be because we'll have to due to homeschooling, but we can hold on to because it allows us to do other things in life. We all have other roles. We are carers or partners or parents. We might have other responsibilities that we want to give more attention to. So that dexterity, that version of agility, I think has come to life and we should hold on to it. With that comes that, as I mentioned, that form of collaboration, people being collaborative because there's greater degree of empathy. This is a common experience, a common crisis. We all have our own version of it, whether you've got room to have an office, whether you're working at the end of the kitchen table, whether you're living on your own or whether you're living with people who now need homeschooling, creates a very different experience. But I think there is it's a collective understanding, a higher degree of empathy, and that has led to a greater degree of collaboration. Now, on your point of resilience, I'm a little concerned about that because I think it's tempting for us to talk about the need to build resilience, and that risks underplaying the quite serious issue of well-being and mental health impact of the situation at the moment. Of course, techniques to build resilience, techniques to spot and identify where your particular stress threshold is being approached and what to do about that. I think organizations can help with that. Management capability can help with that. We shouldn't forget managers themselves have those thresholds and we need to support them effectively. So that I think can help build resilience, but it's important, I think, not to sort of glibly say build resilience and that'll help you through it, as I think that underplays the complexity of the issue. Well, I'm hoping it falls into two parts, and I'm hoping the first part is relatively short term, and the shorter the better, and that is how do we get through the period of time that we are having to operate under lockdown with the homeschooling, with all that comes with that, not being able to see relatives, perhaps not being able to see loved ones who are in care homes. We can very easily forget how much of our personal life affects our work life. Both in a practical sense at this point in time, but also in an emotional sense, and then coming back to that point of mental health and resilience. There are an extraordinarily number of very serious issues that are hovering over many of us, our own versions of them, and therefore that I think is the priority. How do we provide enough support so that people feel as though it's there, that they aren't facing it alone, and that they actually can find a different type of relationship with their employer where it helps them with things other than their job. And by that, I mean their general mental health, the flexibility to work in such a way that allows them to fulfill those other roles in life. That I think is the priority for well-being and I hope it's the short term. Let's hope it's not mid or long term. Now, the priorities mid or long term, in my opinion, are how do we hold on to the increased level of comfort that managers and colleagues have had in discussing the topic of mental health and well-being and their own mental health and well-being. I think we've taken great strides in now no longer perceiving a discussion about mental health and well-being as a discussion about frailty or weakness or something of that ilk. And instead, it's a constructive conversation about how this affects all of us in different ways and to different degrees. I think holding on to that would be the priority post the urgent crisis situation that we've returned to. I referred earlier to those traditional work patterns of commute, work, commute. Typically around the same period of time, we have a rush hour for a reason, and typically into major hubs and cities. So a lot of people heading in the same direction. Now, I consider that they have been barriers to lots of people for a long time. And I'm talking here not only about people with those caring responsibilities, often, not always, but often they still fall in the majority of cases to women. If there's childcare responsibilities, they are disproportionately carried by women, typically, not always. But there are also potential significant barriers to people with disabilities, both physical and invisible. And therefore, I think the type of organization that is able to make a really good fist of how they accommodate flexibility into their version of hybrid working allows themselves to remove those barriers, and that in turn creates a proposition to the external talent market that draws in capability from people in those underrepresented groups that otherwise might have thought that that's not for me because of those unnecessary barriers that we have formed over years of habit. But I also think it opens up channels for talent that already exist in an organization, who again may have seen those barriers as barriers to their career progression and their career development. So I think the type of organization that capitalizes upon the flexibility that we've experienced and holds on to that in their version of future ways of working really does open up a huge new horizon for diversity and inclusion. And it will bring on the talent you already have. It'll bring on the talent that you wish you were able to attract. This is such an important point, and I think it connects to what it is that an organization recognizes as contribution, how it assesses contribution, how it therefore assesses talent. I also think it touches on, not just touches on, I think it's materially affected by existing leadership behaviors. So let me just expand upon that and explain what I mean. So firstly, a business and HR leadership team could come up with the very best example of hybrid ways of working that cracks all of these issues that we are wrestling with, and they develop this fantastic concept. But it will go nowhere if their senior leaders don't embody it, if they don't embrace that, if they themselves think, you know what, the way we used to work suited me. I enjoyed being in the office. I get my energy from being around people. I like to interact with people in the same place. And therefore, I'm going to go back to working that way. I am going to encourage everybody else not to, but I myself, anybody wants me, I'll see you in London. That will become the behavior that is replicated, because the impact that senior leaders have on an organization through what they do is disproportionately greater than the impact they have on what they say. So that this is where them embracing it and living it, even if it's uncomfortable for them, requires adjustment in how they've led. That's the only way that it will be established and sustained. Because if you don't, you'll have an in crowd and an out. Those that gravitate to the office because they know that's where the senior leaders are, and the way to get ahead is to be where the decisions are being taken, to know when they're happening, to form the casual relationships over coffee or in the car, create a two-tier workforce. So you've got to embody these principles as a leader. The second point is, we've talked in HR for who knows how long about the need to eradicate presenteeism, but we haven't done it. The thing to concentrate on, in my opinion, is shifting the definition of of high performance and talent to impact. Talking less about presence, less about a task, but talking about impact and outcome. The most important way of having your strategic intent land is to lose the corporate language and to bring it to life with specifics, and bring it to life with close to departments, if you can, close to team, close to individual, relevant examples of their part in it. I think a lot of organizations struggle as their strategy may sound very credible. It may sound externally to investors, perhaps the market, as impressive, but what it lacks is, I think of a phrase that the ropes don't often touch the ground, and finding the way for your middle managers, your team members, to really comprehend what this means to them, what they can construe by way of purpose. If they can construe purpose from strategy and can understand the relationship between the two and their part in both, I think it gives an organization a much better chance of having everybody pushing in the same direction.